Welcome to Resilience in the Shadows, the podcast from TentMakers of Louisiana. I'm Alex Payton, your host, alongside my mom and co-host Letitia Payton, Executive Director and co-founders of TentMakers. Today's guest is Pamela Elaine Lockridge. Pamela is secretary and co-founder of Jesus Lifted Ministries, a help and resource ministry for evangelists across the United States. A registered nurse by training, she spent 20 years as an ICU RN at the Texas Medical Center in Houston. Later, Pamela earned an Associate of Arts in Criminal Justice and a Master's in Social Work. Though her Master's in Social Work informs her advocacy rather than direct clinical practice, and is now completing a Master's in Homeland Security. As a passionate advocate for adult survivors of child sexual abuse, Pamela produced and hosted a national blog talk radio program where survivors shared their stories and found community support. She also founded Women Survivors in Business, training women survivors in online entrepreneurship to stay grounded and productive during their healing journey. Pamela is the author of Abused from 4 to 18 and its companion workbook, which introduces a new grief therapy model designed to help survivors identify their starting point for healing and fast-track their path to mental wholeness. She lives her life following the Lamb of Christ and looks forward to hearing the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Welcome, Pamela, and thank you so much for coming on Resilience in the Shadows.
Thank you for having me, and I do appreciate TentMakers. I feel honored to be here.
Well, we feel honored to have you, Pamela. Thank you so much, especially after driving such a long way to be here in studio today. We really appreciate that.
Okay.
Yes, we are really so glad that you took the drive in, you and your wonderful husband. Pamela, to begin with, I think we need to share with our listeners a little bit about your background so that we can carry them through to your story of healing. So if you don't mind, would you maybe tell us a little bit about your story of abuse in your childhood so we can begin there?
Okay, sure. Well, it's a difficult story, so if anybody out there feels like they're not ready for it, I want them to step back, maybe watch it later. But I was sexually abused from the age of 4 to 18 by my mother's second husband. She married, she divorced my biological father when I was 4. And then when I was the same age, she remarried, and she married a pedophile. Now, she knew he was a pedophile, and of course, I didn't find this out till many years later. But he sexually abused me from the age of 4 to 18. And so there you have it. That's the first powerful words that I'd like to say about that. And as we get more into the subject and everything, you'll hear more about how he got away with it and everything.
So, Pamela, you said you figured out later that your mom knew he was a pedophile whenever she, I guess, got with him or started in a relationship with him. How did you find that out?
Well, according to Erickson's stages of development, people can't continually repress their memories. And so as much as I did in my 20s, 30s, and 40s stay busy in my adult life, I was able to escape and repress the memories of all this abuse. And I thought when I forgave him, because I became a born-again Christian in my 30s, I'm now 68, that was it. You forgive and that's the end of it. Well, that's not all there is. Forgiveness is part of it, but God has to heal you from it. And he helped me heal from it in his way at my pace so it didn't overwhelm me. Because, anybody that's been 14 years spent as a POW, even POWs come back with strong mental problems that, it's just amazing to me how I'm not I told Miss Letitia, a blithering idiot, locked up somewhere. Why am I so sane and have the knowledge and the ability to learn that I do? It could only be the Lord. But according to your question, when I found out in my 50s, I was alone with my mother, and she had remarried, and he was on his deathbed, this third husband. And I went up there to help her take care of him. And so while we were on the porch one morning, I thought to myself, if I don't talk to my mother now, because she was getting up in years too, that, and I'm needing to heal, that this is part of my healing, needing to bring this out to her. So I mentioned to her, I said, Mother, I need to talk to you about something. And I'm telling you, at this point, I had no idea if she knew or not. So I said to her, Mother, I need to tell you that I was abused by, I'm not going to say his name. Your second husband is what I'm going to say. And she stood up and she said, I'm going to go kill him. And it was just like she had practiced this statement for all those years in case I ever brought it up. And I said, Mother, now you can't go kill him. You have to forgive. And if I've forgiven, surely you can't. And so when we were walking in the house, I said to her, you know who I really feel sorry for in this whole matter? I feel sorry for his sister, who's just now learning about his abuse. And before she could even think, she inadvertently blurted out, she knew he was a pedophile. And so what that told me was, she knew he was a pedophile. Come to find out, the reason him and his sister had moved, because they came from Wisconsin. Oshkosh, Wisconsin is where their family lived, but they moved down south. He had been caught abusing his infant daughter. He never had any contact with her. She never called. He never called. What happened was her stepfather adopted her, and there was never anything said about her. So, putting the puzzle pieces together was what I was doing at that time.
During your teens and early teens, do you think you were you groomed by him to not to feel comfortable enough to not report him? Was there threats of violence? How did that go, especially as you got into your early teens? How did he assert any kind of power or control?
Okay. Well, as you know, it was way before my teens.
Where it started.
So even at age 4, 5, 6, 7, I was constantly under threat of death if I told anybody. And he was an avid hunter, and he would put a deer in the tree outside, huge deer, and he would hang him from the hind end feet, and he would take his knife from the hind part all the way down to the chest, and then the entrails would all spill out, and it would scare me to death. And I thought if he could do that to an animal, that he could do that to me. I was scared to death of him.
Were your family members, so your mother probably knew, you say, or she did know. Were there any other family members that you think know? And if so, why would they not say anything? I mean, we're talking about a child being hurt in some of the worst ways that a child can be hurt, when innocence is taken away from a child. Why do you think they allowed this to happen? Or was it, I'm not even sure if allow is the right word, but maybe you can expand on that.
Okay. I had 2 younger sisters. One was a year younger. We were very close in age. And then I had one 3 years younger. Now, he never sexually abused them. Number one, my next to the youngest son, middle sister, she had a big mouth, and you don't push her around. And he would isolate her. He would put her in a room, and she would not be allowed to be in contact with anybody. To this day, she's very antisocial, very mean, very hurt. because of the neglect. And she witnessed it. I mean, when I say witnessed it, she didn't see it because it was in the dark at night, but she was in the same bed. And sometimes I would even pinch her to wake her up because I thought she could somehow intervene. And she was just laying there scared to death. She didn't want to get involved at all. So, who was I going to tell? Even though she knew, who was she going to tell? My mother was a barmaid. She worked in the bars 6 nights a week. And then on Sundays, she partied. She wanted nothing to do with us children. She didn't want children. She told me that if abortion would have been legal in her day, that I would have never been born. And she also never told me she loved me. The only time that she ever had any affiliation with us children was when we would accidentally wake her up from sleeping so that she could work that night. And she would wake up screaming, GD this and GD that. And, she wasn't a loving mother in any sort of fashion. Being a social worker today, I would say she was very narcissistic.
How did you, especially from 4 to 18, what was your day-to-day life like? Did you have friends? Were you able to go places? Where did you get any sort of socialization or friendship or camaraderie? Was there any outlet for you at the time where you could kind of escape your situation?
Good question. At school, I wouldn't seek out friends because I was so scared they'd find out. And sometimes I already thought people knew somehow that this was happening. And like, I felt bad that, if they did know, how they would feel about me, being such a dirty person. It's kind of like I felt like I was a day child and a night child. And so I disassociated a lot. In the day when I was at school, I would just, I was an isolated, be alone person. And then at night, of course, that was happening. And I was always hoping that the next day, somehow, somebody would be there to intervene, somehow, And so that kept me from, kept me in hope, kept me making like it was a fluid situation, but it never came. And, the one person that was in my life that made me feel somewhat good was my grandmother on my mother's side. Now, my mother was adopted, so that's one reason why I feel she never really connected with us, because she never connected with her mother, her adoptive mother. And I had heard that she went looking for her real mother and found out that she was an actual prostitute. So there's a lot of variables, a lot of dynamics that went on within my family system.
Lastly, about the family system, I'm just interested in this. What was the living situation like as well? Did you live around other family members? Did you live in a neighborhood? Was it rural? What was the scene? Where did you come from a purely, I guess, demographic standpoint?
It was in a city. We lived in a subdivision, and there were kids around, and we played games. And, for the most part, if that wasn't going on, you would think I was just a normal child doing normal things. I had fun. We played hide and seek. We rode bikes. We, did things. But I remember at some point down the road, there was a church that I went to. I can tell that I was seeking something, something I knew. I guess I could say that I knew God was there, but I didn't know how to get to him. I didn't know how to talk to him, So
from a very young age, you started experiencing this. So at age 4, at some point, maybe even at 4, you knew all of this was wrong and it was not natural. And some people may say, well, by the time you were 15, 16 years old, well, you should have known better. Why would you not try to leave, run away, escape? But from my work with trauma victims and survivors, I understand. But I think maybe if you could expand on how that is from the viewpoint of the person who's experiencing it, not from the person who's looking at it going, well, I mean, why would you just not leave?
Right. Yeah, good question. Well, you'd have to know the dynamics of his side of the family. I call her Aunt Patty still, but his sister, she was having an affair with a man who was very powerful. I would even say he could have had mob connections. He owned most of the strip, which was all the bars along the strip back then. That's no longer there, but at one time it was. And she had a child out of wedlock. I was scared, very fearful, and I walked on eggshells, you know. I had to navigate. I had to be careful. And so basically I just was waiting for somebody to save me. You know, it's kind of like, what do you do? Okay, so what happened at age 15, my mother divorced him. So I'm thinking in my mind, that's it. I'm free from him and what have you. Well, she took my 2 sisters, got in a 2-bedroom apartment, and told me that she didn't have any room for me. So she made me go live with him. It was worse because now there was no buffer whatsoever.
So you were basically living with him as his sexual partner.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, this comes later on in my tale, but I was able to take him to civil court, and in his deposition, he tells in his statement that he was having an affair with me at the age of 4, and that I seduced him. That's how they think. Pedophiles don't think like we do. They have a whole different mindset. They treat you like a sexual object, and they own you. And I think I had what was called Stockholm Syndrome, because if you know anything about that, I had no means of support. Nobody was supporting me. He was the only one that gave me shelter, clothes, food. He even gave me drugs at the age of 15. Money. I mean, everything I needed. He'd give me a car to go out with my friends. And then when I'd come home after going out, he would be so jealous that it was scary. And he'd scream, and he'd be drunk, and he'd scream and yell at me, who'd you go to bed with? Who'd you sleep with? You know, and he would just interrogate me like he was Gestapo.
Yeah, we've had other survivors who've talked about when there is a pedophile, they do think they own you and you are subject to them. And as a young person, as a young woman with no other means of support and a mother who's basically said she had no room for you, I can't imagine how you're sitting here today. But I think that's an important thing for people to understand. It's not as easy as just saying, now I'm free, I can leave the situation.
And I think it's important too. I know we've always tried to find the best way to explain this, and we have a survivor in our organization who wears a pin. His name's Tim, and he wears a pin with his picture of when he was the age that he had suffered his abuse. And I think it's important, especially now that we have video on the podcast, right? You can see Pamela sitting right there. She's sitting there. She's composed. She's very well spoken. She was 4 through 18. She wasn't like this. She's a child, right? So you have to remember that she was just like, I mean, her mind, her thinking, I mean, just like I was at 16, you were at 16, everyone was at 16, right? So I think it's important, especially when talking about, well, why wouldn't you just run away at 15? Why wouldn't you just, listen to the circumstances that Pamela's laid out, and then imagine yourself at 16. I think that's the best way to do this is, where were you at 16? Could you have just run away and survived on your own? Maybe some. There might be some that could have, but I think for the most part, most people are going to answer that. And when they look back at themselves at 16, they wouldn't have been able to see a path to which they could have gone off and survived in a healthy way, I should say, in a healthy way. And then I think too, and Pamela, you might agree with this, I think too, when you're in that situation, some of the avenues you probably would have had to take to get money, food, and other things would have led to more
worse.
More abuse.
Exactly.
You'd have just been hopping from one abusive situation to another.
Exactly.
So it's not like there was some clear path. Just you can go off and get a white picket fence and your own house.
No. As a matter of fact, when I finally got to get away from him, I went straight into drugs, straight into trying to find somebody to love me. And it, like you said, each situation was worse than the other because I didn't know what person to connect with, who was going to treat me right. How do you know that as a person that's never been raised to know that? I was raised in hell, so the only place I knew to go was to another hell, and I had the community was very small. Everybody pretty much knew everybody.
So Pamela, you're at this point now where how did you separate from him?
Okay.
And then you say that led into more hell. And then if you could maybe elaborate into how did you get out of that hell?
Okay.
Because obviously you did. There's a point, another turning point.
Yes. Well, when I went to live with him at age 15, he had a Mustang that I dearly loved. And he promised me the title to that car when I turned 18 if I would stay with him for those 3 years and do anything sexually that he wanted me to do. So I acquiesced to that because I'm seeing my freedom 3 years down the road. I saw an end. And so that's the way it was for those 3 years. And he would let me drive the car and go out and just kind of be somewhat normal. Of course, I always had to hear about it when I came home. As a matter of fact, one night I came home and he was so drunk and so jealous that he got his chainsaw out, and he actually chased me around his work truck with the chainsaw, and if I hadn't ducked and he hit the side of the truck with that chainsaw, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. He was mean. He was a monster. He was a pedophile. I could go on and on. He used to beat us children with the belt. There wasn't very many times that we didn't go to school without belt marks on our back, our legs. He would stand us in the corner at night. I say the corner of the wall or what have you. And he would go to sleep, and if he woke up and found us asleep, we would get the belt. And he had some 50-cent piece coins in his drawer. It was almost like he was wanting us to do something with them. And my little sister, of course, it attracted her to him, and she never told that she did it, so we all three got the belt. He used to keep us in the bathtub when the water was out, and we'd be in there freezing, and he wouldn't let us out of the bathtub. It was a nightmare.
And you're talking about a work truck, so this man actually had a job.
Oh, yeah.
And went to work every day and
Yes,
faced his
yes,
coworkers
yes.
and professionals and whatever.
He was a construction worker. He was a lathe, if anybody knows what that is. He did lathe. It's what you hang before you hang the sheetrock.
Right.
Yeah.
And so at 18, do you actually get the title to
I
the Mustang?
got the title to the Mustang, and I got out of there. I what I went to do was I felt like, well, I'm a sex object, right? So what does a sex object do? I went to a strip club and started dancing. I didn't take all my clothes off. That was back in the day when, you didn't have to, and so I'm thankful for that. But I did dance, and what my job was to get the people to buy me drinks. And I had a boyfriend. I wasn't really that sexually promiscuous, and I wasn't selling my body. I never did that. So that's some, I had some moral compass, I mean, I didn't want to do the things that I was doing with him,
So how did you go from, so I know that you became a nurse. So how did you go from dancing in a strip club to becoming a nurse? And you've got several more degrees, and we all know that. So how did that happen?
Okay. Well, of course, I had to make good grades or I'd get beat with the belt, right? So, but I liked learning. I loved math. I loved just being a good student because I had no identity. And to me, that was being productive and somewhat of a good identity. So one of my siblings, the second one, not the youngest, she was wanting to go to nursing school. She begged me, she chided me, she coerced me, she did everything she could to get me to go with her. And I was like, I don't want to go to no nursing school. I didn't know even anything about college, Finally, she talked me into it. And when I started doing it, it was like I would take my money from my earnings from working in the club. Of course, I had a small apartment, had the car. I was starting to come out and take care of myself because that paid really good at the strip club, okay? And so I started going to college and loved it. And I said, I will finish this. I don't care how, hell or high water, I'm going to complete this nursing degree because that's going to be my identity. And one thing I did know, I wasn't going to become the evil that was perpetrated against me. I was going to become a caregiver. So I was at a crossroads and I had to make that choice, as everyone does. You can become the evil that was perpetrated against you, or you can become the good that you could and be productive. And so I would say to anybody that's, constantly in and out of jail or on abusive drugs, addictions, you have a choice. You don't have to do those things. There's plenty of places to get help, and look what I went through and could have really be dead right now from drugs or alcohol and overdosing. You see this, and I'm just so proud that I chose that and became a nurse. And I laugh because my sister, she got pregnant and dropped out and never wanted to be a nurse because what happened was she was giving a bed bath to this man, and he said, I want you to wash my diddle. And as soon as he said that, she threw the rag up. That was it.
Well, I guess you were prepared in that
I mean,
way.
the man could wash his own diddle. He wasn't
Wow.
penis,
Yeah.
I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
So you finished nursing school, and what was it like going? I think you were an ICU nurse.
Yeah, I worked in the neonatal unit. I think I had quit dancing, and I got a job in the neonatal unit at LSU Hospital. That's where the little babies, that are premature. And what I would do is draw their blood. They had a little stopcock in their umbilical, so you could draw the blood out. You didn't have to stick them. and then run that in a machine, and they'd be on ventilators, and that would give you their oxygen level, and the nurses would then know, and the doctors, how to adjust their oxygen levels while they were on the vent. So I was doing that, and I thought that's where I was going to end up because I loved it. But somehow I ended up with the big people. I didn't want to work with the big people because they could push a button and call you every 5 minutes, but I loved it.
So obviously education played a big part in forming your life, and you went from nurse to what? What other degree did you get?
Well, I retired from nursing in my 40s, and my 2 children left the nest, and I was at a point where I needed to know more about what happened to me, more about how it formed me. And I knew that social work had power, that they had some kind of power, and they do. Social workers know so much, and people just think they take kids away. That is not what a social worker does. I mean, that's a whole different path that you can take, but there's so many more paths that you can take as a social worker than that. And so, but like I said, I never really went to become a social worker. I went to learn. And I did learn, and that's how I ended up coming out with my book.
So walk us through that. So we have, every survivor has a different path, right? Everyone's so different.
Yeah.
Their story's so different. And, there are some survivors that go through what they've gone through, and then they end up on the advocacy and ministry side. There's some who don't, just because it's too much. They want to just carry on and live their lives and go on and just, go to their job, do a good job at work, take care of their families, whatever it may be. And then there's some who are still floating in a type of purgatory, right? They're in their healing journey. They might be early, they might be late in their healing journey, doesn't matter. They're somewhere there, and they're kind of so making the leap. I'm going to assume that during this time, and especially going for your master's in social work, you were probably doing some intense healing, some introspection, which has allowed you to even have the strength, I'm sure, to start,
Yes.
ministering. So how did that Jesus Lifted Ministries? How did we get there? What was the spark?
Okay. Well, Jesus Lifted Ministries is a whole kind of different story. So do you mind if I go ahead and stay with the social work story for me?
Yeah.
Okay. With the social work, I became a very good researcher. When you write papers and when you get your master's of science, you have to do research. And of course, Miss Letitia, you know all about research, being in your in TentMakers and all that. You have to find out statistics and different things. And of course, we know the horrible statistics of child sexual abuse in this nation. There's over 60 million adult survivors of child sexual abuse in America that is today struggling or finding a path on their healing. And when I found those statistics out, 1 in 4 girls, or 1 in 3 girls, and 1 in 20 boys, this is CDC findings, will be sexually abused before the age of 18 in America. This is ludicrous. In a civilized nation of America, we're allowing this to go on. Well, in my research, while I was studying to get my social work degree, there's so many theories, and one of them that struck me of my abuse, because like I said, I'm studying social work because I want to understand my abuse. And so I came across the stages of death and dying. And when I looked at those stages, which was made famous by the Swiss psychiatrist Elizabeth Kübler-Ross, and many of you know her stages, she had 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Okay, and I correlated that to think, the reason I'm not really healing is because I need to grieve this loss. Just like people lose somebody important to them, they have to grieve. Well, click, it just was an epiphany. I have got to take myself through intentional grieving of this loss.
And the loss being the loss of?
The loss of my childhood
Right.
sexual innocence and the loss of being a child at all. Yes, I played games. Yes, I hide and seek, played with children. But really, with that tape running around my head and that cloud over me, was I very happy, really, inside? Maybe extrinsically, but not intrinsically. And extrinsically is when the things around you make you happy, but intrinsically you're not happy inside because of what's eating at you inside, like a cancer that you can't do anything about. So when I figured that out, I took myself on an intentional healing journey and came up with the therapy called Grief Stages Plus Narrative Therapy. The reason plus is I figured out that when I got to acceptance, I needed to add 3 more stages: striving, thriving, and closure. And when I got to closure, it was like that tape that I woke up to every morning was snipped, and I wasn't having that anymore. And it was like a wall was built up against those people that were constantly in my life, And why would I even want to think of them anymore? But I couldn't help it until I got the closure and wrote the therapy and took myself through the therapy.
Pamela, in your book, you introduce a new grief therapy model. Can you give the listeners an idea of what you're doing there and how that was informed by your experiences?
Right. Okay, so I really do think that the Lord, He is my guide, and we're going to get to the ministry and how I was, came to know Jesus. But I wrote the book, and one of the reasons that the book flowed so well is because my abuser, believe it or not, and nobody could believe this, went in and told on itself that he had been abused, that he had abused me. And what happened was my sister had started calling. She ended up in the hospital for witnessing this, and it was bothering her all these years. We never talked about it. And then she called.
Witnessing your abuse, you mean?
Yes. Knowing that it happened. And so she went in and came out with a $14,000 bill. And she called him and said, "You're paying this bill." And so she started opening this window, this door. And I didn't know she was even doing it. Come to find out, I get a call from a sex crimes detective saying, "I have an open case that I need to talk with you about." And I'm like, "What?" And she says that he came in to get a protective order against her and me. Now, why he brought me into it is anybody's guess. But he did know that prescription had run out criminally, that he couldn't be touched criminally. So he went in and said to the sex crimes detective, "The reason I need this protective order against her and her sister is because they're harassing me because I sexually abused her from the age of 4 to 18. She said, "Stand up, sir, you're under arrest." And of course, she checked with the laws and found out that he couldn't be touched criminally. But something was bothering me about it because I ended up in the hospital. I ended up with a new diagnosis of PTSD. And I found an attorney, and something about it. When I took it to the attorney, and I was telling him all about it, and the attorney sat there, and then he jumps up from the table and he runs in the other room, and I'm looking at my husband saying, he don't care. Look at him. He's just in and out of his office, whatever. He comes back in, and it was like a light bulb had gone off. He said, you know what that man did? And I said, what? He said, he took your story, made it public, and caused you a tort injury and broke your privacy rights. That's what you're feeling. And so he ended up opening a case, a civil case, and we took it to court. And 5 years later, I won. Well, we settled. And the attorneys, law enforcement, nobody could believe the man confessed.
Well, that's what's wild sometimes, and I guess maybe you have more insight. I guess it has something to do with pedophiles and pedophilia, but it was the same with in our case, right, where the investigators brought him in and he confessed, and it was kind of a nonchalant thing. It wasn't like a CSI or a Law and Order Special Victims Unit. It was like, well, yeah.
I just find it amazing that he needed protection from you,
Yes,
and you did not even know
that
that he needed protection from you, nor were you pursuing him. But I guess it's like Alex says, in many cases of these pedophiles, I mean, it was probably some arrogance there, thinking and knowing that he would not be criminally charged.
He
but
was trying to abuse me again.
Right.
That's what the attorney
holding
said.
that power over you.
Yes.
Right. And then probably on some level that was him saying what he did and got away with it. So it would be a part of the narcissistic, I'm guessing.
Exactly. But, you got to feel for him. I mean, even though they did what they did, they're so ignorant of what they're doing. They're so narcissist is hard. I mean, they don't feel anything. They don't understand pain. I mean, I don't get it. It's just, I guess it's trying to figure out evil, and we're never going to figure it out. I don't want to figure it out. Because if I figured it out, I'd probably be evil, and I don't want to know. But, yeah, people were very, so this is my thing. If a detective can bring a murderer in and interrogate them long enough to get the truth out of them, that they murdered somebody, why can't we get these pedophiles to telling themselves? We can. It's just the fear. I want to tell, as an advocate, I want to tell people, don't be afraid. They're cowards. They don't think right. They're not going to come get you. They've already got you. You need to tell, number one, so that they don't hurt anybody else. You need to tell, number two, because people need to know they're not alone. And number three, they're weak, and we can get the truth out of them.
And what would you tell those who know that it's happening? Because you're talking more in the sense of to victims and survivors of abuse, but what about the ones who know and don't say anything? Because they're still allowing, when you don't say anything, you're still allowing other people to get hurt. And in your case, even though you thought you were free from him, you were an adult, and he's still holding that over you. So it's a lifelong thing if someone does not come forward.
That's right. Silence is consent. Our silence is telling the predator it's okay to do this. Now, even if you don't think you're going to get a dime, and it's not about money. I mean, if you get some money, good, but it's not about the money. It's about ending this in America. If we don't, it's exponentially growing because nobody talks about it. Oh, that's a taboo subject. No, it's not. What if we thought of cancer as a taboo subject? We're just going to let it, we're going to stop research on it. We're going to, just let everybody die of it. No.
And one of the things you talked about was the data and the statistics. And I think we talk about the data, and for women, it depends on what organization you're looking at in their data. Some have 1 in 3, some have 1 in 4 for women. I've seen some for men at 1 in 10 or maybe 1 in 20. But in my work, or in the work of TentMakers that we've done, I honestly believe for the men it is much more prevalent. It's just not reported. Because
Absolutely.
the statistics are only as good as the reporting. If we don't have people reporting it, then the statistics are not completely accurate.
Absolutely. Please report, people, because at least if you're not wanting to go ahead and get justice for yourself, which I say, try to get justice for yourself. It's so empowering. It's so validating. It's so healing to try to do that. But get it on a blotter with the police that this person is doing this, even if you want to do it anonymously, so that they be on the radar of the police, so that they can protect other children from having to go through a lifelong adverse, the ACEs.
Mm-hmm.
Because my advocacy now, I'm 68, but my advocacy is to see that people that were abused at my young age don't have to wait till they're 50, in their 50s, to start getting healing.
And your book is great. I've been reading your book. I'm almost completely finished with it. You make a lot of good points, and I want to make sure that we do give people an understanding that you do have a book, and there is something in there that I think would be helpful to a lot of listeners. And we were talking about what the method of healing that you explain in your book. Do you want to talk about maybe the thriving part, or if there's a gap that we haven't yet talked about?
And maybe what GSPNT stands for as well.
Okay. GSPNT is grief stages plus narrative therapy. Narrative therapy came about from 2 individuals from Australia. One of them has passed away, but their thought is that people are not the problem. The problem is the problem. And what that means is you are not depression. You are not bipolar. You have depression. You have bipolar. What that means is it's treatable, and, your identity is not, so many people try to label people. You're just a normal person who needs help. And then the grief stages is intentionally grieving, going back and thinking about your childhood when you were trying to deny it and when you were angry about it. And then in your adulthood, how you go through denial and anger, and it's a protection. But as you grieve, you are actually starting to heal. Okay, and then I added striving, thriving, and closure, which striving has to do with education and how education grounded me while I was going through my healing. It could be, doesn't have to be, like a master's or something like that. It could be some kind of crocheting. It could be anything, to use your time so that you don't constantly think of what happened to you. You need to fill your mind with good thoughts and renew your mind. And thriving happened whenever closure happened when the case settled. That was just an awesome day. And that day is the day I started writing my story, and the day that I started understanding the grieving process. So I'm not saying that this is the only option for healing, but it's a good start to start with a clinician. And that's another thing about my book. I don't believe that anybody should do this on their own, that they should have a mental health professional to take them through the book and work through the book. And I also have a workbook that goes with the book. And it does, in the beginning, it does some psychoeducation, and then it goes into feelings, going through therapy, levels of stress going through therapy. You know, there's a third level of stress that can actually kill you. And so people need to deal with stress as they go through this. So it's kind of, it's not easy, but it is simple. I made it simple. And if you follow the guidelines in the book with the workbook, you will find closure. And closure is when you no longer sit there and think about this anymore. You should not give this any more time of your life, because it does affect family systems, and it will heal the family. But I'm going to tell you, once it comes out, you could lose family members. For instance, my sister, who started this whole ball, she has such a personality disorder that I cannot deal with her. We can't be in the same room, but it's because of our past. It's not because we don't love each other, but we're very toxic when we get together. And that's another thing I was going to tell people. You need to look at the relationships that you're having. Don't try to have relationships if somebody doesn't want to believe you. Don't force that. Because you may be harming them. That's, you had a thing you brought up about allies. Well, you don't want to go around telling your story to somebody I would say tell your story to another survivor. It's just like a cancer survivor. They can come to me all they want and tell me their story. I won't get it because I've never had cancer. I'm sorry. I feel for you, and I don't like that you have it, but I can't relate, And so this one lady called me one time, and she was so upset, and I was trying to help her, and she says, well, I tell all these people at work about it. Nobody cares. I said, honey, it's not that they don't care. They've not been through it, and they don't understand it, and you're putting more harm on them than good. I said, you tell this to survivors and medical professionals. You don't tell this to just anybody.
Right. So, and I think community and allies are very important to the healing process.
Amen.
But I also believe there is an element in there to that survivors can help to educate communities.
Oh, yeah.
And other families on the aspect of behavior and signs of abuse. But it's not in the telling of the story necessarily, but in the educational part of being a survivor.
Absolutely true.
And
that's what, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And that's what TentMakers is all about. Yeah. And that's why I'm so, proud of y'all for what you're doing in TentMakers. And you're specific to clergy abuse. And when I tell people, about the cases that are going on in South Louisiana, they just freak out. They're like, what? And I was like, maybe being able to mention that, yes, there's many attorneys that y'all know that you could refer people from South Louisiana if they hear this story and they want to come forward. And I say, if there's anybody in mid-Louisiana and North Louisiana, they can contact me because I have a good attorney in that area.
And speaking of attorneys, I think it's important that people go to attorneys who understand trauma.
Now, Pamela, as we're wrapping up here, your story has followed the kind of path that we really wanted to make sure we have a lot of representation in the podcast. So obviously, as we had already talked about, not every survivor story is going to start off bad, good, hopeful at the end, right? yours does, and we think it's important to showcase all survivor stories, even if they don't have good endings, even if they're stuck still in a hell. But I think it does put you in a place, though. And I know you've listened to the podcast before. At the end of the podcast, we always ask for the guest to say something to survivors who are out there. There's probably about 3 distinct categories of our listeners. There's survivors, there's family members, friends of survivors, and then there's allies who are sometimes they're listening. They might be listening just because I've had people reach out to me before. They just found the podcast. They stumbled on it, and they're trying to figure out what this is all about, right? But we always have the guest deliver a message. So would you mind giving a message firstly to other survivors who we know are a big part of our demographic? What do you have to say to them?
Well, I would say do this. Think of a multidisciplinary team, okay? You need to have a team of supporters, okay? If you have a friend that you can talk to that really does kind of get it, even though they've never been through it, that's a support. If you have any, pastors or any kind of women's groups or things like that, that's a support. I would definitely say get an attorney, okay? Even if you don't think you have a case or you don't, because they're going to see something that you haven't, just like in my case. I would go to law enforcement, at least get it on the record that it happened to you, even if it happened, because in Louisiana, I don't know if y'all have let people know that the statute of limitations is no more on sexual abuse. Thank you, Jesus, and thank the Jason Hayes and Miss Letitia, who is so gracious and so fearless to bring this about.
Well, there were others who did so much work as well.
Yeah, the legislature was unanimous.
Right, and we had several people testifying, and testifying was something that was very dear to my heart. Even though it didn't affect us, it affected many others.
Okay. And then, of course, your psychologist or your therapist. I'm a social worker, so therefore I'm going to be all 4 licensed clinical social workers. They're miracle workers. And also LPCs, licensed professional counselors. A psychiatrist in case you do need medication. Just recently, I couldn't get out of bed, and I just thought it was me. And I ended up going back to my medication management because I'm also bipolar, which was very much exacerbated by my abuse. But so, you may have a need for medication. And I just got on a new medication, and I'm up and about and doing all sorts of things and trying to get my body back in shape and things like that. But of course, the first and foremost is the Lord. I would not be here if it wasn't for Him. I got saved when I was 30, and I became a born-again Christian. And what that means is I finally figured out that Jesus was real. He made Himself real to me. Of course, I had to ask Him, And that's when me and my husband began a ministry called Jesus Lifted Ministries. And that ministry is a helps ministry to God's leaders, evangelists. I don't know if y'all have noticed it or known it, but evangelists have become obsolete in America. They kind of went out with Billy Graham. If you remember Billy Graham, he was a wonderful man, and all the people he led to Christ. Well, this country's become so evil, especially with this child abuse stuff. This is just so evil, and we need to get a handle on it. And Jesus loves His children, and He loves us as well. But His children, who are so vulnerable, and so unable to defend themselves in any capacity. It's just heinous. And so, not that we don't think, I think that the perpetrator can get help if he wants it. There's Sex Addicts Anonymous. There's therapists that'll work with them. They can renew their mind, shut out the pornography, shut out all the things that, lead them to stay in that evil. But the multidisciplinary team is what people need to seek out, because it will empower them. And empowerment is an extremely powerful word. I know it says power in there again, but empowerment for victims like myself, survivors, has been just blissful.
And what about now to family members of survivors and allies, those who are just looking to learn more, and those who are family members or best friends or survivors who are intentionally trying to learn these sorts of things, hear these stories in an attempt to connect better or help better their family members and friends?
Okay. First of all, don't try to fix them. Okay? Just be there for them. Because to me, many people get married and they get married and they have baggage, right? And they try to fix one another, and you cannot fix each other. You have to have professional help. So encourage the person to get professional help and validate that. There's so much stigmatism, Miss Letitia, that goes along with this, and we need to stop the stigmatism.
Pamela, we've had other guests on the show, and as a guy who loves liberal arts, I studied literature all through college, loved poetry and reading stories, and I've found that survivor community is not short on talent. And as we know, and of course you're going to agree with, art is a good way to express yourself, bring about healing. And I know today you brought a poem. So if you wouldn't mind, let's close this episode out with a reading of your poem.
Absolutely. And I want to thank TentMakers, and please, y'all go online and look at what they do. They're such precious people, and they really, really care. Okay, the name of my poem is, and I wrote it in one sitting. It wasn't like I came back and forth and wrote it. But it says, The Tunnel. Crawl into the tunnel, the journey to be free. It's time to face the darkness of reality. The cruelty you'll remember, raw emotions won't be pure. Anger, pain, suffering, and others you'll endure. In the middle of the tunnel, burdened down like a heavy stone, no one can do this for you. You'll feel so all alone. For trauma has established your mental state of pain, and only past that's grieved will bring to you relief. The end of the tunnel brings light that never was. Then joy springs up, makes things new. True life you can pursue. You've come a long way, baby. You've gained great mental health. Now roar your truth for all to share. All predators beware. Poem by Pamela Elaine Lockridge. Praise Jesus.
That brings us to the end of this powerful conversation with Pamela Lockridge. Pamela, thank you for courageously sharing your journey and the tools that you've developed to help survivors move from despair into thriving.
Okay. Thank you, guys, and we're praying for you.
Thank you so much, Pamela. That brings us to the end of this powerful conversation with Pamela Lockridge. Pamela, thank you for courageously sharing your journey and the tools you developed to help survivors move from despair into thriving. To explore Pamela's grief therapy workbook or request a copy of Abused from 4 to 18, email lock14@bellsouth.net. You can visit Women Survivors in Business at www.womensurvivors.net. womensurvivorsinbusiness.org. And we look forward to having Pamela again on the show to dive deeper into that part of her ministry. If you'd like to support TentMakers in Louisiana through prayer, volunteering, or a gift, visit tentmakers.la. If today's episode spoke to you, please subscribe to Resilience in the Shadows, rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our YouTube channel, and share this episode with anyone who needs hope and healing. You'll also find a list of survivor resources on our website. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay resilient, and remember, even in the shadows, there is always light.
I know your motto.
you know our outro, our closer.
I did that once, and then Marley was like, no, you have to do that
Yeah.
all again. And then I forgot it one day, and Marley was like, you forgot that.